All right, so climate news tonight, and we've got a lot to talk about. We've had some issues with some CO2 talk and some glacier talk, and today Mari and I experienced yet another censorship attempt by Facebook. Mari had randomly shared a link yesterday on Facebook and Twitter talking about the glaciers not retreating due to global warming. So the data stops in 2015 since the article is old. Mari had also commented in the link for the video on Facebook, gotta love the old reminders, meaning this was not a current article. This got a lot of attention from us on Twitter. And actually, Jim Cantori singled it out and liked it. However, today we woke up with a message of the article that we shared was now 404'd on Forbes.com, and some hoax alert website has literally not called us out by name, but I mean, Mari, the troublemaker that she is solely responsible for this because she had started sharing this random article from back in 2015. And they accuse Mari, or I'm assuming they're accusing her, of cherry picking data. And the discussion I had with Mari today was kind of along the lines of, they're saying it's cherry picking because you don't have the numbers that show the melt that we had in 18 and 17 and 16. And they're upset that that's not being reflected in this conversation of global warming causing the ice caps to melt. But we all know that 18 and 19 has had stronger ice growth than we've seen in the past 5-7 years. So, but with that all being said, it's truly begun a battle now. Ever since the whole NASA article was leaked out and people like us have connected the dots, I know I've seen other channels covering it. DAP 2030 mentioned a little bit about it. And it seems like now we are digging in for the real fight of censorship, of articles being removed, of people being accused of cherry picking or taking something out of context even, just to help prove a point. Yesterday, Mari and I came across a gentleman who was trying to attempt grand solar minimums and their theories. And the person was basically a global warming, man-made global warming propaganda machine. I mean, I have never heard such lack of knowledge on the topic. And I get it. These people don't pay attention and they think they have a grasp of what's really happening with the theory and they just roll with it instead of taking the time to actually go through everything, study the science, understand what's happening. They often refer to people like you and I as climate deniers. We're not climate deniers. We're not climate change deniers. We're man-made climate change deniers. I think we've seen the evidence over the past 15 years. We continue to see more and more new research that reflects cooling is coming. Now it's showing us that cooling is here. But yet still the AGW crowd wants to ignore all that information. They don't even want to look at it. They're telling you that the science is settled. There's no use in looking at new research. And we've said this several times on the Grand Solar Minimum channel that the science is never settled. And science is always going to be about testing over and over and over again. Even if the consensus claims that Grand Solar Minimums are legitly a part of why we see crop failures and cooling temperatures, and they have a correlation to this stuff, you still, as a scientist, are going to want to test the theory as much as possible to gain understanding of that theory and maybe, just maybe, having a leg up on predicting when these mega super grand solar minimums and whatnots are happening, which we have a lot of information about that. There's so much stuff that I want to tell all of you right now, but there's a lot of good stuff in the works. I can tell you this, Valentina Zarkova's work is almost completely accepted and will be released soon. And I promise you guys, we will have a thorough examination of that paper, as well as discussions with Zarkova And I think this changes a lot too with what we announced last week on the show about NASA saying that this is the weakest cycle coming up in the last 200 years. It came out the same time where Zarkova's work was being submitted for the final edit process. So it's been accepted. Now we're just waiting for the release. So to me, this is not a coincidence. This was done in synchronicity. They knew this was going to happen. This was timing. This was everything about timing. So the next couple of months on this channel are going to be crucial because there's going to be so much to go over. There's going to be so much to dissect. And I have a feeling that Zarkova and Mari and I will be in constant contact, more than just one follow-up here. It's going to take a couple of discussions, if you ask me. Time permitting for her. She's a very busy person. She travels a lot. She's very, very hard work at her research, and it means a lot to her. So this channel is also going to focus on a lot of her work and help promote that as well, because if this is accepted, peer-reviewed, and we got a glimpse of what was going on with this paper several months ago when she gave her presentation about super grand solar minimum. So I can tell you this, conversations I've had with Mari about the conversations they had the other day, there's some stuff that we really need to have a talk about. And I'm going to save all that for when we get the paper and we get a chance to have Zarkova on personally and not just manipulate her work or speculate. We are going to give it to you straight, guys. So exciting things ahead, also scary at the same time though. But let's get back to our climate news. Annual CO2 emissions 2018 BP data. This was a report put together by BP. What's up with that? Once again, putting this together. This is a great article. Lots of pieces to go over. First, it wants to show you a pie chart of how much emissions that man puts into the atmosphere. Now, just because you see numbers like 28.26% of CO2, you got to remember that 28.26% is from that 0.004% of CO2 in the atmosphere. And I tell you, folks, the reason why, and I was thinking about this too, but the reason why we could be seeing higher CO2 emissions is that it is true that CO2 is plant food, and with the abundance of nitrogen in our atmosphere and our bedrock, our plants are benefiting big time, but only if they're getting a chance to grow. So when you think about all the acreage this year that is not growing crops, there's crops that are not absorbing the CO2. So that could be a possibility on why we're seeing CO2 levels continue to rise, along with, it's a very small part of it though. I'm not saying it's making an impact cooling or anything like that. I'm saying it's a very small part. We still have the volcanoes, in my opinion, which is the greatest amount of CO2 that's emitted into our atmosphere on a daily basis, and they continue to get bigger and bigger. Just like in 2018, we saw an uptick of some 50,000 footers and multiple 30,000 footers. This year, almost right at the same time, we're talking about 55,000 footers and 30,000 footers, some 40,000 footers. So it almost appears that the frequency and the intensities on these are getting a little bit worse this year. But back to the CO2. Great pie chart here. Shows everybody's contributions in the atmosphere. And then it has another interesting graph, I should say, from CO2 emissions from developed and developing worlds, 1965 through 2018. And the developing world CO2 emissions were a lot higher, which makes sense to me. You're building more, you're burning more fuels probably in the process of building more. Countries that are in worlds that are developed, you see a steady red line. It's right there in the middle, the sharp red line, that is. Not much decrease, not much increase, just kind of hanging out right there in a groove. So that makes sense to me here. But reading this, some initial points arising from the BP data. Take some highlights here. Having been relatively stable for the overall last 7 years, global CO2 emissions grew by approximately 2% in 2018. 2.5% of this growth was in developing worlds, whereas 1.1% of the growth was in the developed world. This growth of approximately about 650 million tons in 2018 was despite all the international commitments arising from the Paris Climate Agreement. The contrast between the developed and developing worlds remains stark. Developing world emissions overtook developed world CO2 emissions in 2005. They have been escalating ever since. The likely prognosis for their CO2 emissions that they will continue to grow and accelerate. So, again, right on cue with what we've been saying when it comes to CO2, it will continue to rise, just like the volcanic emissions will continue to rise, which will also raise CO2. And we'll also see a big difference in temperatures as well down the road. In the next 5 years, the graph is not going to be just a little bit. It's going to be very significant, where there's going to be almost like a fork from where CO2 goes up and temperature goes down. It's going to be very clear to a lot of folks out there. Talks about other countries, how much emissions they put up. China and Hong Kong, they put up a lot of our emissions, mainly because of CO2 that's burned from their coal plants, natural gas. This article, guys, is chock full of information, and I thought it was important to bring it to you because BP, to me, is being pretty transparent. And there are some points that I want to make here at the bottom of this. Global CO2 previously had plateaued, but since 2016 they have shown a significant uplift. Unsurprisingly, the emissions growth has mainly occurred in developing nations, groups such as India and the rest of the world, as their quality of life is progressing improving. That's not what I wanted. Sorry. Bottom part. Maybe. Yes. Okay. So here we go. The main parts of this article that stuck out the most to me. This is a very lengthy piece here. But here it says, carbon dioxide is 75 times less effective as greenhouse gas than water vapor and clouds. Any extra CO2 in the atmosphere just makes plants grow better and helps to feed the world. So hugely damaging UK policy will only address 1 out of 7,500 of the problem, an extra CO2 in the atmosphere. The modern short pulse of beneficial global warming has stopped 20 years ago, and recent global temperatures are now stable or declining. Important to point out as well. According to reliable ice core records of the last millennium, was the coldest of our history, and the world has already begun cooling quite rapidly for the last 3,000 years. The one here at the bottom kind of makes me think a little bit here. The weather gets worse in colder times. The world will very soon, on a geological timescale, revert to a true glaciation again, resulting in mile-high ice sheets over New York. Yeah, I'm thinking southern Tennessee here in the next couple of years. Who knows? But not only is the data plain, very simple to see, very well put together by BP. Thank you for this report. Thank you for What's Up With That for taking the time to write this piece and dissect it. But with all the talk of rising CO2 units over the past several years, yet we still have talk of colder temperatures. And now we're hearing in this article, and we've heard this before. I mean, there's tons of us in the Grand Solar Minimum community that believe glaciation is around the corner. Some folks think it's very, very soon, no later than 2050. Some folks think it's going to be in the 2040s. But a lot of you, most of you have been here for a long time. You've heard this before in the 70s. We're going to die by cooling. Crops are going to be failing. You've heard this scare before. And then in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, it was the global warming scare. And then Al Gore took over and claims that no more ice caps on the poles by 2014, and no more snow for our children's children. They won't even know what it looks like. Almost everything, in fact, everything he said has been a lie. And CO2 continues to rise And yet we continue to see temperatures cool ever so slightly, but they are cooling down almost 0.5 degrees over baseline from 2016. I find that very significant in just 3 years. Climate fail. Influential Aussie politician demands cheaper energy and a new coal plant. I read parts of this. Actually, I read it all. They're wheeling and dealing here in Australia. They want cheaper electricity. So they're basically holding up some tax cuts, is what it sounds like, over some of the politicians here in Australia who want a coal-fired power station. Now, this One Nation leader, Pauline Hanson, has consistently supported an end to the green energy mandates to make Australian energy more affordable. Her climate views are advised by a prominent Aussie climate skeptic, Malcolm Roberts, who is likely to win a One Nation federal Senate seat. Votes are still being counted. But when Scott Morrison won the election, we were told that the days of these green policies are going to be out the window. So even though this Pauline Hanson doesn't have the majority vote, I still feel like that Scott Morrison definitely wants to see the Australian people get cheaper electricity. And from what I understand, Mr. Morrison's stance on this is that he is a pro-coal kind of guy. So this should be a no-brainer for governmental business in Australia. And it's just good to see that it appears these parties are going to come together to work on negotiating a tax cut via we get a coal-fired power station. And like I said, with the knowledge that this Morrison has on the climate and coal, he's already pro-coal, this should happen. This will probably happen. And hopefully Australian nation will see a relief on their electricity bills and their winter heating bill. Now, this news really comes right as we're approaching their winter season, and it's been cold there already. Some areas started receiving their midwinter cold 2 months early before it was supposed to be here. So I'm sure there's plenty of people in Australia that are hoping that this gets pushed through fast and quick, because it's getting very, very expensive to power and heat their homes right now as we speak, and cool it. Hey, let's not ignore the fact that we had 120 degree Fahrenheit temperatures in Australia during their summer months. They had a heat wave, pretty bad one. But still, in the grand solar minimum, you have shorter grow seasons and longer and colder winters. And right now, winter showed up 2 months early in Australia, parts of Australia, I should say. Chances are it's going to run a little late as well, which backs up the whole shorter grow seasons. Look at the last 2 years on grow seasons. And boy, do I have a before and after comparison. You guys are just mouths are going to hit the floor. But look at the last 2 years on how things have kind of declined since we started talking about the increase of cosmic rays, the lower solar activity, how vulnerable Earth is now to space particles and highly charged particles from all over the galaxy, seeding our clouds, creating cloud coverage and cooling, reflecting what TSI we're getting from the sun back into space. Which reminds me, they're talking about the albedo effect and how the Greenland ice sheets are melting really, really fast. If there's cloud coverage, the TSI that they're claiming that is melting these ice in Greenland, that's false. That TSI is already being bounced off in the cloud deck for the most part. So we'll get into that here just in a second. But I wanted to talk about the largest glacier in Greenland, the Jakobshavn, is clearly growing very, very, very strong over the last 3 years. And here is the reading from the melt that we had. Okay. 200 billion tons of ice melted on June 13th, I believe was the date. Okay. They're showing another chart here. Melt extent from July 8th, 2012 to July 12th. Look at that. Almost completely gone. But the point I'm trying to make is, in 2018, we saw over 510 billion tons of ice growth for the year. Now, divide 310 billion tons by 365, and you had an average growth of about 1.5, 1.6 billion tons per day. So we get one day where we get 2 billion tons in one day that melts. So if you put that up against how much we grow in one day, usually, about 1.6, let's say it's only growing 1.3. So we're basically losing 0.7 billion tons of ice for that one day. But you know how mainstream media is, and this was part of why our article got taken down, because of all this crap, this headline of these sled dogs sliding across, water with ice still underneath, so they're wading in frozen waters, basically. I guess that's what we're looking at here. But guys, this spring, Greenland is melting 3 times faster and even earlier than the phase of the global warming era, blah, blah, blah. The Starman did a really good job on showing some charts. And they show that these peaks happen. That what we're looking at here happens every summer in the Northern Hemisphere. Okay. Yes, it is early. The graphs I saw, the peaks were more around this area right here. So yes, it's early, but it's more than possible to see even a double spike on this another day. But again, folks, let's calm it down a little bit here. 2 billion tons of ice is a lot of ice if you don't know how much ice is on Greenland, okay? So when you hear the number of 510 billion tons of ice from last year, 2018, all right? 510 billion tons in the entire year is what we gained. And you guys want to freak out about one day of losing 30% above normal ice in one day? 30%. 30 to 40%, I guess. That's it. We'll make that back up in 4 days. I mean, this is the part of the year where Greenland gets warm. It is summertime, approaching summertime here in the Northern Hemisphere. Last I checked, June 21st goes all the way through September 21st. It's an amazing season. It warms during that period of time. And with high pressure blocking of that area right now, it's kind of been around for a little while. It's magnifying the stratospheric warming that we're having too. I know we talk about Greenland blocks mainly in the wintertime. That usually means nor'easters on the East Coast for us. More snow, colder temperatures dipping further south in these Greenland blocks. So I imagine in the summer months it has the reverse effect as well. So I think that has something to do with the reason why they have the 2 billion tons of ice. Now, yes, it is a lot of ice in one day to melt, but it has happened before. Many times. So, again, thanks to Mari. She did a great job today on our solar update where she kind of had herself a little bit of a rant. Proud of her. Mari is a very factual person. She doesn't like to start controversy. And to hear her be upset about the way we're being treated with this information, she has every right to be upset, especially when the people who are exaggerating the lie even more, trying to make us and people like us less credible with this mainstream media hype and scare of the 2 billion tons of ice lost in one day. Yes, it's a high amount, but like I said, you do the math. 1.5, 1.6 billion tons of ice was gained on an average for a daily basis in 2018. If you take the 510 billion tons and divide it by 365 days, you're going to get around 1.5, 1.6 billion tons a day of growth. So when you look at that, it's a very tiny percentage of the ice that just melted in Greenland. It does not deserve the attention, and especially Forbes.com. We reached out to them. We really like to know why you guys had to remove that article. It was clearly stating that up until that point in time, 2015, that global warming was not melting the polar ice caps like everybody was being told. All right, so let's get into the crop report, guys. Before we do that, Matt Bros and a couple other people, actually multiple people, sent me this link. Rex Adams, I think, and also, forgive me, guys, John Clark. I have gotten this email, I'm pretty sure, from all three of you. And then I believe Mari shared this with me as well. This is not fake. This guy pays attention to what he's doing. And the picture on the left is this time last year. And I believe it because there were some times in Ohio, and this is Indiana, these crop fields, where the temperature, the conditions in Ohio, southwest Ohio, eastern Indiana, it gets hot, it gets humid. And there's lots of growth. I mean, I've seen corn stalks, no lie, 12 feet tall in parts of Ohio. 2014, 2015, 2016. So in 2018, this guy was up to his eyes in corn stalks. And here he is in 2019, and he's up to his, top of his feet. That's not even coming up to the ankles, folks. And when I saw this picture the other night, it's sad. This is the reality of some of these farmers right now. And we're at June 19th. Summer is supposed to be starting in 2 days. And then we have almost 3 full months of summer-like temperatures. I mentioned the crop situation last night in a comment section on a friend's Facebook page because I believe he was talking about New York had passed a recent law where immigrants are receiving their driver's license in the state of New York illegally. And now they're approving it. So New York is saying you can, if you're illegal, that's fine. You can get a driver's license. And I told him, I said, this is just a distraction from what's really happening right now. All these outrageous political stunts that are being, placed throughout the country and the world. It's a distraction. They better pay attention to what's happening to our farms. My friend, who, no fault of his own, he's just part of the normal mainstream. He's a normal, regular guy, married with kids, good job, watches sports, watches the news, does the normal, everyday Joe type activities. So there may not be a session or time for him to sit and critically think, which people get busy in their life, and that does happen. So he relies on mainstream media and just the old gut. His comment and his reply to mine was, we'll be fine. The crops will be fine. It'll warm up late this summer and stay warm through the fall. I hope he's right. I really hope he's right, because I know a couple farmers who also are praying for an Indian summer. I was talking to Matt from Nebraska the other night about heat and what he needs to get these corn crops and other crops growing. And the problem is that where he lives, he hasn't had enough heat. He hasn't had enough days that's in a temperature that's suitable for growing. So even though we're going to show you crop report today of people that are actually able to work in fields, the next problem is getting these plants to grow. And we've shown you guys statistics where the crops are planted, but there is a certain amount that are refusing to just come up out of the ground, whether it's soil temperature, whether it's soil saturation, whatever the case may be. We are having trouble right now with plants and crops getting going and trying to get this grow season underway. Right now, if you live in the deep south, you're in good shape, temperature-wise, for crop growing. A little bit different picture in the center part of the United States, and this is what we were talking about. Look at this, 2019, the corn prices emerged by June. Look at it, 79% right now, compared to other years behind it. We are a lot lower than 2013 and 2019. I mean, this is shocking. Look at this, guys. This is the amount of U.S. corn that has emerged. Okay? So in 2019, we're well off the pace right now. Soybeans, not as bad, but only 55% of the soybean crop is growing. So you can say not as bad, but that's not great either. Let's continue to move through the day now. I'll find out some more numbers on the percentages of what's been planted and what's coming out of the ground. This is becoming one of my more reliable parts of this report. We're seeing numbers closer to 100%. June 16th, though, Illinois still at 88%. They're up 15%. They were 100% planted last year at this point. Their 5-year average is 100%, so they're still down 12% as of June 16th. The worst area right now, Ohio. And that's only going to get worse because of the continued moisture that you guys are seeing as we speak right now. Ohio has 68% of its corn planted. Now, the friend of mine that said the crops will be fine, everything will be fine, surprisingly, he's from Ohio. He lives near the area of the tornado of recent. He's watching his local towns and villages flooding right now because of all the rain they're getting. And there's more to come. So out of the 68% planted in Ohio, only 50% of the crop has emerged. Last year, this time, they were 95% of the crops were emerged from the ground. 95%. Indiana, 84% of your crops are planted. You're slowly but surely getting up there. Last year, this time, though, you had 100% planted, and only 61% of the crop has emerged. And guys, think about it this way. The pictures I showed you of the guy standing in the field with a corn stalk to his eyes, and now they're not even up to his ankles, that's in Indiana. So his field is part of that 61% that's emerged. That's what we're looking at in Indiana, and Illinois, and Ohio. Send in your pictures, folk. If you got pictures of cornfields that are low or high, I want to see both sides of it. I just don't want the low producing fields. I want to see who's out there that's doing well. North Carolina, 100%. You're all good. You're in the ground. 100% coming out of the ground. Tennessee, Texas, same thing for you guys. 100% in the ground, 99% coming out of the ground. If they're predicting mile-high ice sheets over New York, Tennessee is a no-brainer, I guess, for me. It could be different for everybody else. It's going to be hot and muggy still, even during the GSM, but definitely better than living in an area that is going to be under ice in the next several decades. Who knows how quickly that will come to fruition. Soybeans. Let's move to that. Illinois, 49% last week. You guys jumped up to 70% in the ground, but only 50% has emerged. And that's up 25% from the week before as well. And then we got Indiana, 42% soybeans were planted last week. This week we're at 64%, but only 38% of the soybean crop has emerged from the ground. Last year this time, we were at 93%. So right now, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio really stand, and Michigan too. I mean, good Lord, 34% is showing out of the ground, 53% planted. They were 85% planted last year this time, and 75% emerged from the ground at this point in time as well. Ohio's got one of the worst soybean crops right now. in the United States. It was Indiana and Illinois. They just took over. Ohio last week had 17% emerging from the ground. This week up 12% to 29%. But last year this time we had 87% of soybean crops poking through. Tennessee coming in a little low. Just kidding. Their 5-year average is a 62% emerge right now. They're already sitting at 72% emerge from the ground. And last year was at 69%. So they're better than last year. They're better than their 5-year average. Tennessee clearly is so far looking the best as far as crop season for soybeans and corn, which there's other crops that we need to follow besides these two, but these are a big part of our foundation of our food securities. So the situations look like they're improving. We're seeing more 83%. I mean, granted, Kansas 99%. Last time this year was emerged of corn, only 83%. Kentucky, you're only down 6% this year. 4%, I'm sorry. Michigan, holy heck. You had 86% of the corn popping through. This year you have 48% of the crops, of corn crops popping through. And it's June 16th. That's when this report was concluded. Missouri was at 100% last year this time. They're at 80. They're 20% back. Emerged. And we don't know how tall these crops are. We're just telling you what's come out of the ground. North Carolina doing well. 100% emerged. Good for you. 50% Ohio. We already talked about that. 56 in South Dakota. We kind of imagine that too. They had a lot of floods from snow and rain. And the proof is right here, guys. Here's some cotton. Some of it's doing good. Some of it's not doing so good. For the most part, your cotton plants, looks like we're okay. Peanuts, different story. Not much hurting in that department as well. And rice, also doing well compared to previous years. But the main soybean and corn are really suffering right now due to the flooding conditions and everything else. This progress report here is great. It gives us winter wheat reports as well, spring wheat, barley percent, barley condition. I highly advise everybody to take time to check out these crop reports. They come out every week. Was it Tuesday every week, Maury?
Yes.
So every Tuesday we get a new one. So when we come on live Wednesday, it's kind of like the Roy Spencer report, how we go over that every first of the month. We will go over this the day of or after when this crop report does come out. Ohio, 2.5 days of suitable work in fields. The continuation of all the rain, I don't know if that's accurate. I'm sure it might be a little high. Nebraska, it's saying you got 5.4 days. The heart of the country, the middle part of the country, is looking good. According to farmers in Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, also getting full weeks of work finally. But it's June 16th, guys. This is the first time all year that we've seen a full week worth of work that's able to be done in the fields, and it's June 16th. It might be too late for some of these places. I mean, just check out the surplus we have right now. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Gotta love these crop reports. All right. Lots of water in Ohio and Michigan, slightly more in Indiana, New York. We're in that lighter blue. We're actually in that 40 to 49% to almost 50% range of surplus when it comes to water. The South, surprisingly, you're kind of low. Louisiana, Mississippi, these waters that are receded, that were flooded earlier, guys, you got to be concerned with contamination now. What's in the ground? What's in the soil after all the floodwaters? What are we looking at? And that's also the cause for concern as well. All right, guys, sit tight. Be right back.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.